Chapter 2 of The Mystery of Pain. Recording by Ethan D. Gilkey. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. A brief narrative of my thoughts may be allowed me, as the simplest method I can adopt of giving them expression. Some time ago, two feelings were forcibly impressed upon my mind. On one hand, I was made conscious afresh of the evil that is in man's present state, an evil deeply affecting his whole being, and demanding for its remedy nothing less than a reconstruction and restoration of his nature. And, on the other hand, I was scarcely less impressed with the evidence that there exists in all human experience something unseen, some fact beyond our consciousness, so that the seeming of our life is not the truth of it. Neither of these thoughts is new. They came with new force to my mind owing to particular lines of thought on which I was engaged, which presented them to me in fresh lights and with new evidence, making old words burn with new luster. But they are in themselves familiar truths. The radical need of change in human nature has been affirmed by the best members of the human race, as long as history records the thoughts of men. With us it is become mixed up in theological doctrines, and so has been made the subject of verbal disputes. But it itself is an old and native feeling of the human heart, and the belief that there is an unseen fact beneath all that we are conscious of, that there is something unperceived by us which gives rise to all of our experience, also is not new, though it has lately taken more distinct form and place in the human mind. They are two old and customary thoughts, but the freshness with which they have appeared to me enabled me to see them in a relation which I had not perceived before. That which suggested itself to me was this: if man's nature needs a change, and there is some fact we are not conscious of causing our experience, then may not this fact be the working of that very change in man? This thought assumed by degrees in my mind the character of an assured and manifest truth. It is the starting point from which the thoughts contained in this volume sprang. Our experience is the working out of a change in man. Or, to speak in clearer and more familiar terms, it is the carrying out of man's redemption. It is clear that if this thought could be accepted as the truth, it would fulfill the conditions for a complete change in our thought of life. To connect all our experience with such an end would enable us to read it entirely anew. For by giving to our pains a place of use and necessity, not centered on ourselves, but extending to others, and indeed affecting others chiefly, as existing for and essential to God's great work in the world, by giving our painful experience this place, its whole aspect would be altered. It would come within the sphere of that pain which is capable of being an instrument of joy, which exhibits the highest good we can in our present state attain, the pain, that is, of martyrdom and sacrifice. Nor are we left to rest merely in this general thought. It comes to us realized in the highest form, and raises our souls to a height which might seem too awful and too full of joy. For so regarded, all our pains, all human pain and loss, identify themselves in meaning and in end with the sufferings of Christ. He stands as the revealer to us of human life, and the emotions which his story awakens within us become the pattern of those with which all distress may be encountered, and every loss accepted. And surely we may at least say this: if God would give us the best and greatest gift, that which above all others we might long for and aspire after, even though in despair, it is this that he must give us, the privilege he gave his Son, to be used and sacrificed for the best and greatest end. Nothing else could so fulfill our nature or satisfy our hearts as this, that Christ's own life should be renewed, his work fulfilled in us, that we should be united with him so, and feel the wonderful words of St. Paul true of our own poor and blank-seeming sorrows. I fill up that which is behind with the afflictions of Christ, for his body's sake, which is the church. Our suffering being related to an end that is not merely ours, an end that is of all ends the greatest and best. For we are so made as to rejoice in others' good, to find in it indeed our highest joy, to rejoice above all in serving it. And if this thought of human life is true, we see that the gospel addresses man as constituted thus. Surely it should do so. If it came to us on any other ground, it would be addressing itself not only to the lower, but to the weaker elements within us. It would pass by the worthiest part of us, the part most kindred to itself. For with what light does the gospel come? What revelation does it make? But this, that God's highest joy is in others' good. Nay, that his great heart is impatient of their misery, and springs forward with an eager haste to take it upon himself, finding therein alone the means to make us know him. When we look there, we can see why God is blessed, the happy being. We should be happy if we had love, and found it for such a work. If we might take the human sorrow, and bear it on our hearts, and give our lives too, and our sorrows for the redemption of the world. If we might undertake that work, the smallest part of it, and live for that and die for it, that would be God's greatest gift to us. His best gift, then, would be not in our pleasures, but in our sorrows, in our losses and evils, not in our possessions or delights. If this one fact of the use of our lives by God in the redemption of the world were true, the very foundations of our lives would be changed. The current of our thought and feeling must pour itself through a new channel. The view, then, that I desire to suggest rests upon these two thoughts: that there is something accomplished in our experience which is unseen by us, and that sacrifice for others is good. For this unseen work that is done through us is something done for others. With this view, I think we shall find hereafter that both the facts of life and the constitution of our own nature so evidently agree as to give it the greatest possible confirmation. But I may first say a few words respecting the demand which is thus made upon us to recognize the existence of an unseen fact in all that we experience. It is evident that all the effects of the events with which we are concerned are not, and could not possibly be, perceived by us. We see and feel things, alike the great ones and the small ones, as we esteem them, only as they affect our senses, that is, only in small part and for a short time. They soon pass beyond our sight, and while they are within it, they never show us all they are, often those which are the greatest seeming to us the least. How little we are able often to calculate the influence, even upon our own future, of events or actions of which we seem to have had the most perfect knowledge at the time, and of the effects of these events on others, which must go on, so far as we can estimate, without any end. Only the smallest fragment is within our view. It is one of the first lessons taught men by experience, not to judge of events by what they seem alone, but to remember that there may be much more involved in them than appears. To judge of our life, therefore, merely by that which is seen of it, is to commit ourselves to certain error. So that the thought I have suggested, that in all our experience there is some unseen relation to spiritual things, to a spiritual work in man, makes on us no new demand. It is but the carrying out to their legitimate and surely to their natural result principles which experience has established. We shall be sure to be thinking and feeling falsely respecting our life if we cannot recognize some unseen bearing on it. For we do not, we know we cannot, see the whole. And this principle is established not only by experience. It is the lesson which, almost more than any other, science teaches us also. In exploring the material world, we soon find that, in order to understand any part of it aright, we must recognize things which are unseen, and have regard to conditions or to actions which do not come within our direct perception. It is enough to instance the pressure of air, of which we have no consciousness, the motion of the earth, equally unperceivable by us, the hidden force lurking in unseen atoms, of chemical affinity or electricity, the vibrations which traverse the universal ether, and in the fine invisible unity which makes all her forces one, whereby, holding to the unseen, man has traced out in nature a perfect order amid all the confusion. So far we have learnt that what we directly and naturally perceived in things around us, and the events which happened to us, was never meant to be the guide to our thoughts respecting them. The chief part of the value of science, indeed, consists in bringing into our knowledge, and so into our practical use, that which is not within our consciousness, and which our senses can only indirectly, or not even at all, perceive. Scientific knowledge consists in regarding the unseen, and looking at things that are in one sense invisible. It is therefore true, because it fulfils this evident condition for the attainment of truth. And thus, when it is said that all human experience is the working out of redemption of the world, the restoration and perfecting of man's being, it is no difficulty in the way, or evidence to the contrary, that is not visibly so. If this seem like a difficulty, it arises only from our natural tendency to limit our thoughts by our impressions, and so to condemn ourselves to error. That is the one source of error from which all advance in knowledge sets us free. It is the one difficulty which obstructs the road to truth. Reference is made to an unseen fact. It should be so. If the fact were not unseen, it could not be the truth, for it would not be freed from the limitations of our perspective. This does but bring the thought into harmony with all our thoughts that we have just ground for believing true. And if a certain effort is demanded to free ourselves from the dominion of our own small impressions, it is but the same effort which is, or has been, the condition of all knowledge. But here the effort is not intellectual. We are not called upon by great stretch of thought to see relations in ordinary facts which no common eye can see. We are not bidden to follow causes to far distant and remote effects. The demand is not for a larger intellectual view, but for faith, for that which is the common and inevitable basis of all religion, and is the foundation stone of Christianity. We have to recognize a fact no human eye, indeed, can fully trace, but which God reveals. End of Chapter 2 of The Mystery of Pain. Recording by Ethan D. Gilkey.